Subsector 20. ID on 3 suspects, wanted on multiple counts. Any judges, please?
Respect the badge. He earned it with his blood. Fear the gun. Your sentence may be death because
I am the law.
Judge Dredd's had a tough time in its attempts to go from the pages of the 2000 AD comics to the big screen. After years of development hell, the character first hit theaters in 1995 with Sylvester Stallone in the title role. Despite the effort that went into it, and even the adherence to an R rating, it was seen as too cartoony, and didn't go over well. A nice chunk of that was due to Stallone interfering with the director's vision of the film, and letting his ego get in the way of the production. With a $90 million budget, it only pulled in $113 million worldwide. Figuring the character was box office poison, there was no desire to try again. Years go by and comic book movies are finally being taken seriously thanks to the success of films like Blade, X-Men, and Spider-Man. In 2005, Batman Begins is released, and while it was only a moderate hit, it gained much critical acclaim. This was the first major comic book movie reboot. After the disaster that was Batman and Robin, Warner Brothers wanted to try to bring back the gritty, dark hero elements that helped to make the Tim Burton Batman a success. In 2008, The Dark Knight's released, and this time, it's a massive critical and financial hit. The film raked in over $1 billion and proved that you could do a darker, more adult comic book movie and still be a hit. With Batman Begins hitting the reset button on the film series, studios were looking at other properties to give a do-over. In the mid-2000s, writer-producer Alex Garland dreamed of a Dredd reboot. In 2006, he began writing the script. Garland had previously written the novel The Beach, which would go on to be adapted to film starring Leonardo DiCaprio. He also wrote 28 Days Later and Sunshine, both of which were directed by Danny Boyle. When he discovered two of his friends were looking to get into larger budget features, he convinced them to finance the Judge Dredd reboot, simply titled Dredd. Getting the film rights to the character proved to be difficult, as it traded hands numerous times after the 1995 movie. Finally, after 2 years of trying to get the rights sorted out, they got the rights and were able to move forward with the production. The team settled in with the British studio DNA Films to produce. Garland had the script written, and they began to look for a director. In the meantime, the visual effects team worked with Garland on the concept art for the look of the world. Garland was in contact with John Wagner and Carlos Ezquerra, the creators of the character. He wanted their input to make sure the film was as authentic as possible. He wrote the film to be like a day in the life of Dredd. Garland made sure to keep the script more in line with the comics than with the first movie. That meant keeping the helmet on, no romantic subplot, no character arc, and no comedic relief sidekick. While there are moments of dark humor in the film, Dredd himself is humorless. The film was offered to Duncan Jones, director of Moon and Source Code, but he turned it down because he respected the script and didn't think he could do it justice. Eventually it went to Pete Travis, director of Vantage Point and Endgame. They insisted the film be dark and gritty like the comics, and not bright and colorful like the first movie. That's not saying they color corrected everything gray, they just wanted the world to look more grimy. There was actually a fair amount of color in the film, and frequent splashes of yellow throughout. In 2010, worldwide distribution was picked up by Reliance Big Pictures. They agreed to co-produce the film and help them achieve a $45 million budget. They wanted to shoot the film in 3D, but only if they could do it in a unique way, and not just have stuff pop out at the audience every so often. At the time, current 3D tech wasn't what they wanted. The cameras were too bulky and cumbersome, and so they developed lighter handheld ones, so they would have an easier time doing close-up shots. The film revolved around the sale of a drug called slow-mo that made everything feel like it was going in slow motion. Garland felt the slow-mo was pivotal to the film and wanted to make it look like nothing that we had ever seen before. They used a special camera called a Phantom Flex that filmed everything at 3,000 frames per second, making amazing-looking slow-motion shots. In an early slow-mo sequence, when the drug users shot, the ripple effect was caused by shooting them with compressed air. The bullet wound was added in later. They wanted to do as much of the film with practical effects as possible. They only used CGI when they had to, or as a way to help cut costs with the production. For example, the atrium was only one corner. They filmed it, replicated it, redressed a few things, and made it look like it was the entire enclosure, and not just a small segment. It was also only a few floors high, and the rest was just copies of the section, stacked upward with CGI. The villain of the film was Madeline Madrigal, or
AKA Mama.
She was a ruthless drug dealer that had taken control of Peach Trees, a 200-story building that acted like its own self-contained city. As a way to introduce the character, they produced a motion comic called Top of the World Mama and released it for free online before the film was released in theaters. Originally, the character of Mama was supposed to be an older woman, but actress Lena Headey loved the character so much, her audition was perfect, and convinced Garland to rewrite the character younger. The music that played during Mama's slow-mo sequence came about in the most unusual way. Paul Leonard Morgan, the composer, had received a tip from his friend, Jeff Burrow, a member of the band Portishead. He heard a track on SoundCloud where somebody took the Justin Bieber song You Smile and slowed it down 800%. The result was something completely different from the source. Morgan loved it and composed his own version for the film, so they wouldn't have to pay Bieber any licensing rights. By using the effect of slow-mo, Garland wanted to make the violence beautiful. So while many scenes are overwhelmingly gory, there's an undeniable beauty to them. The toughest one to get right was Mama falling to her death and smashing her head open on the ground. They hired Karl Urban to play Dredd. He had the perfect voice and scowl to complement the character. In the comics, the character of Dredd is never seen without his helmet, something the first film refused since they didn't want to cover the star's face the entire film. They stuck with it for Dredd, and it was actually in Urban's contract that whenever he was on set, he was to be wearing the helmet. The character of Dredd is not a superhero. He was created as a commentary on US culture. His face is always covered because justice has no face. Being that he's judge, jury, and executioner, his helmet bears the resemblance to the hood of the Middle Ages executioners. The eagle represented the American eagle, but also was a symbol of fascism, which was used by the Romans and the Nazis. Speaking of which, the glare in the visor of his helmet is almost always an SS. The Lawmaster motorcycle worked in the confines of the comic, but didn't work with real-world physics. They redesigned it and built it around a 500cc motorcycle. Since the bike could be ridden, Urban insisted on driving it himself. They also redesigned his armor to be more realistic. Olivia Thirlby was brought in to play fan-favorite Judge Anderson, only in the film she was still in training and wasn't a full judge yet. After years of pre-production, the film began shooting in 2010. The exterior shots were filmed in Johannesburg, South Africa. In order to make the city look like Megacity, they digitally added in the massive building blocks. Garland wanted them to look like gravestones in a cemetery. Megacity 1 was New York. For a sense of scale of the towers, here's the Empire State Building. The interior shots and most of the visual effects work was done at Cape Town Studios. While Garland wrote and produced the film, he was more involved in the production than most. So much so that the actors often consulted with him rather than the actual director. This created some tension between Garland and Travis. The film was shot in 13 weeks and was released by Lionsgate in the US on September 21st, 2012. Despite a fairly large ad campaign from Lionsgate, the film opened in 6th place. There were a few things that hurt the film. First, even though reboots were more common in 2012, people still thought this was a sequel to the 1995 film. Another thing was how people were calling it a shameless ripoff of The Raid Redemption, which was released in the US a few months before Dredd. While there are similarities, cops storming a building to take down a drug lord, it is simply a coincidence. Besides that, even though The Raid was released before Dredd, it began its production after Dredd in 2011. The film majorly underperformed and made only $35 million worldwide. However, word of mouth spread. It was getting great critical reviews, and fans who were able to see it in the theater were singing its praises. So when the film was released on home video, it dominated the charts. It was the #1 DVD and Blu-ray in both the US and the UK, and was the best-selling digital download in places like iTunes. Petitions cropped up and fans were pleading for a sequel. 2000 AD even endorsed the petition. Urban spoke out about how much he would love to do another one. Right now the sequel is still up in the air. It's been a little over 2 years, so it's not out of the question yet. Dredd was an amazing film, a perfect example of how to do a proper reboot. They looked at what the previous film did wrong, and made sure to not repeat the mistakes. While I did enjoy the '95 Stallone Judge Dredd, I did a whole video about it a few years ago, it doesn't hold a candle to this version. They managed to create a living, breathing world that took place almost entirely inside of one building. The effects are outstanding, and most of the CGI you can't even tell is CGI, which is the way it should be. The story was tense, brutal, and doesn't let up or feel the need to stick an out-of-place comedy routine to lighten the tension. It's 96 minutes of, forgive the cliche, pure adrenaline. I know it's a long shot, but I hope the studio listens to the fans and makes a sequel. They don't have to go all out. They showed what they can do with $40 million, which to most of us is still a lot of money, but it's easier for a studio to be convinced to do a sequel to a $40 million movie that flopped than a $250 million movie that flopped. Dredd's too good a film to stop there. In a time where lackluster films get sequel after sequel, Dredd deserves another shot. The world was subjected to 3 Big Mama's House movies. I think it's only fair that we get at least one more Dredd. Drock it.
Yeah, I heard you, hotshot.
What?
I said, hotshot.